the quiet town of Clanton, Mississippi, 10-year-old Tanya Haley never made it home from the store. Hours later, her father, Carl Lee, finds her bloodied and broken, barely able to speak. 2 white men had brutally attacked her. As Carl's rage consumes him, he makes a chilling decision. Justice won't wait for the courts. Once upon a time in a small town called Clanton, Mississippi, there lived a 10-year-old African-American girl named Tanya Haley. Tanya was lively and full of dreams, but one tragic day, her life changed forever. While she was walking home from the grocery store, 2 boys named Billy Ray Cobb and Pete Willard, who were white and held hateful beliefs against people of color, approached her. In a shocking and horrifying moment, they grabbed Tanya and subjected her to a terrible act of violence. They hurt her badly, leaving her bruised and broken. The news of Tanya's suffering spread quickly, and the 2 boys were arrested for their terrible actions. Tanya's father, Carl Lee Haley, was devastated and furious about what happened to his daughter. He knew he needed help to seek justice for Tanya, so he turned to a lawyer named Jake Brigance. Jake was a white lawyer with a relaxed personality, but Carl felt anxious. He worried that the deep-rooted racism in their community might allow the boys to escape punishment, just like in another case he had heard about where 4 white teenagers were let go after attacking a black girl. In a moment of pure rage and heartbreak, Carl could no longer contain his feelings. He decided to take matters into his own hands. While waiting for the 2 boys at the courthouse, he ambushed them with a gun. He shot them repeatedly, killing them right there in front of everyone. In the chaos, however, Deputy Looney, who was trying to protect the courthouse, was accidentally caught in the crossfire. After committing this act, Carl calmly walked over to the police and confessed to what he had done. He told them he acted out of revenge for Tanya and felt no regret for his actions. Initially, Jake Brigance hesitated to take on Carl's case. He understood the risks involved, especially since the town had a history of racism, and he knew that this case would be extremely controversial. Not only that, but he lacked the experience and resources to properly defend Carl. As news of the crime and Carl's revenge spread through the media, the Ku Klux Klan, a hate group known for its violent racism, began to organize in Clanton. Freddie Lee Cobb, the brother of one of the boys Carl had killed, started making threats against Jake and his family. He even worked to create a chapter of the Klan in the area. The local district attorney, Rufus Buckley, decided to push for the death penalty against Carl, and the judge, Omar Noose, denied Jake's request to move the trial to a different location where they might find a more fair jury. During the preparations for the trial, a determined law student named Ellen Rourke approached Jake. She was from Massachusetts and worked with the American Civil Liberties Union, the ACLU. Although Jake was initially unsure about accepting her help, he eventually agreed, realizing that they needed all the support they could get to build a solid defense. He also reached out to his friend, Harry Rex, for advice and sought guidance from Lucianne Wilbanks, a once prominent civil rights lawyer who had faced troubles of his own. Jake visited Carl in jail, where he learned more about the heart-wrenching events that led to the murders. Carl shared his pain and anger over what happened to Tanya. Jake felt the weight of Carl's suffering and the injustice that he and his family had faced throughout their lives. This experience changed Jake. He knew he had to continue with the case, despite the significant challenges and risks involved. The Ku Klux Klan, a hate group that targeted African Americans, began to threaten Jake and his team. They attacked Jake's elderly secretary, causing her husband to suffer a heart attack from the stress of the assault. In the meantime, Jake faces increasing threats because of the case. One night, Jake's wife receives a call from an anonymous caller, telling her to get herself and her daughter out of the house immediately. Suddenly, her daughter starts screaming, informing her about a burning cross in their yard, a clear sign of the Klan's threats. This violence created tension at home, as Jack's wife blamed him for not taking Carl's warning seriously. To keep his family safe, the police had to evacuate them from their home. On another night, Jake and the police managed to capture a Klan member. During the arrest, they found a bomb hidden in a case. In a moment of quick thinking, Jake threw the bomb into the air, where it exploded far from anyone. This frightening incident made Jake realize that he needed to protect his family even more. He decided to send his wife and young daughter away while the trial continued, worried for their safety. As the trial moved forward, tensions in the town escalated. The Klan marched through the streets, confronting a large group of mostly black protesters outside the courthouse, holding signs that say, "Free Carl Lee." When the Klan hears about this, they decide to hold their own march, shouting threats against Carl. A violent clash soon breaks out between the two groups. The situation becomes so heated, the National Guard is called in to help control the crowds and stop any riots from starting. The situation quickly spiraled out of control, with police struggling to manage the chaos. During the unrest, a young black teenager threw a Molotov cocktail at the KKK Grand Dragon, tragically killing him in the flames. Meanwhile, Jake found himself feeling a growing attraction to Ellen Rourke, his assistant. They almost crossed a line into an affair, but Jake managed to regain control over his emotions. However, when he returned home that day, he was devastated to discover that his house had been burned down by the racist groups. He rushed to the scene, but it was already too late. The house is destroyed by the flames, and tragically, Jake's dog dies in the fire. The following morning, the Mississippi National Guard was called in to restore order to the town. Sitting on the still smoking steps of his destroyed home, Jake called out for his dog, feeling lost and overwhelmed. His friend Harry Rex visited him and suggested that maybe it was time for Jake to quit the case, but Jake argued passionately that giving up now would make all his sacrifices meaningless. He wanted to fight for justice, not just for Carl, but for Tonya and all those who had suffered. As the trial continued, the jury began to discuss the case secretly in a restaurant, ignoring the judge's instructions to keep their deliberations private. Most of them leaned toward a guilty verdict for Carl, making his future look grim. After leaving the courthouse one day, Jake faced danger when Freddie Lee Cobb, the brother of one of the racists, tried to shoot him. Fortunately, Jake was unharmed, but the bullet struck a National Guardsman, leaving him paralyzed. The situation grew darker when Ellen Rourke was kidnapped by the Klan. They beat her, tied her to a stake in the woods, and left her there to die in her underwear. Luckily, she was saved by Tim Nunley, an informant who was secretly a Klan member known as Mickey Mouse. Tim risked his life to rescue Ellen, showing that not everyone in the Klan was entirely committed to their violent ways. Feeling desperate, Jake visited Carl in his jail cell, suggesting that he might want to accept a lesser guilty plea to avoid a harsher sentence. But Carl refused, expressing his deep frustration with Jake's perspective on race and justice. He pointed out that although Jake considered himself a friend, he had never visited Carl's home, and their children would never grow up together. Carl explained that he chose Jake as his lawyer precisely because he saw him as an enemy. As a white man, Jake had grown up with the same racial prejudices that influenced the jury. Carl challenged Jake to think about how he could persuade the jury. He urged Jake to consider what argument would convince him, if he were a juror, to vote for Carl's acquittal. This made Jake realize the depth of the challenge he faced. During the trial, Jake managed to discredit the state psychiatrist, Dr. Wilbur Rodiver, by showing that his testimony was biased. But then, the prosecutor, Rufus Buckley, flipped the situation around by revealing that Jake's psychiatrist, Dr. Willard Terrell Bass, had a previous conviction for statutory rape. This revelation left Jack feeling hopeless, and he had to tell Carl that their chances for an acquittal were slim. As the trial reached its climax, the courtroom was filled with anxious spectators. Jake stood up to present his closing argument. He asked the jury to close their eyes and listen carefully. He began to describe, in painful detail, the horrific rape of a young girl, mirroring the tragic story of Tonya. Then, he challenged the jury by asking them to imagine that the victim was white. This powerful statement highlighted the deep-seated racism in their community, suggesting that if Tonya had been white, Carl's actions would have been seen very differently by the public. People would have understood his motives, and he likely wouldn't have faced prosecution. Jake argued that if the jury could find it in their hearts to spare the life of a white man for a vengeful act, then they should be able to do the same for a black man like Carl. After much deliberation, an African-American child burst out of the courthouse, shouting, "He's innocent!" The crowd outside erupted in joy, celebrating the unexpected news. However, the Klan, enraged by the verdict, became violent again. Sheriff Ozzie Walls arrested Freddie Lee and one of his own racist deputies for their involvement in the chaos. The story comes to a conclusion in a touching moment when Jake brought his wife and daughter to a family cookout at Carl's home. Carl was initially surprised and standoffish, but Jake explained he just thought the kids could play together. This small gesture sparked hope and understanding, showing that even in a community filled with tension, there could be steps towards healing. The story ends on a hopeful note, suggesting that change is possible, even in a world filled with prejudice and violence. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe to our channel. Thanks for watching.